I pulled into the graveled driveway, expecting the quiet hum of cicadas and the soft sparkle of the lake beyond the trees. Instead, I froze, my eyes locking on a glaring red and white sold sign planted squarely in the dirt. My cabin, my escape from the world, my peaceful retreat, stood behind it like some prize on display. A strange silver SUV sat where my truck should be, doors flung open and boxes littered the porch. For a second I thought I had the wrong address, but my gut told me otherwise. Dragging my feet up the path, I noticed the porch swing swaying gently, as if it were mocking me. The faint smell of fresh paint hung in the air, covering the familiar cedar scent I loved. Two men in tank tops lugged furniture inside, their muddy boots stomping across my rug. I'd spent a summer hand-weaving that rug from old fishing rope, and now it was just a doormat to strangers. One of them looked up, nodded at me, then went back to work without a word. "Excuse me?" I called, my voice sharper than I intended. "What exactly do you think you're doing here?" The taller one, all tattoos and bad attitude, grinned like he'd been waiting for this moment. "You, the previous owner? Karen said you might stop by." That name made my stomach drop faster than a boat anchor in deep water. Karen, the HOA president with the permanent scowl and clipboard. Karen was a force of nature. If that nature was a hurricane fueled entirely by spite and hairspray, she'd spent years finding new ways to remind everyone she was in charge. Her son Chad, yes, that's actually his name, was a 30-year-old man-child with a boat he didn't pay for. Apparently, he also now had a lake cabin he didn't pay for. And judging by the smirk on Tank Top Guy, it was mine. I marched to the front door, ignoring the thud of furniture behind me, and banged hard enough to rattle the frame. I marched to the front door, ignoring the thud of furniture behind me, and banged hard enough to rattle the frame. The door swung open to reveal Chad himself, barefoot, sipping something from a can like it was just another Sunday. He drawled. "That was fast. Thought you'd be in Florida for another week." He had the gall to lean against my doorframe as though he owned it, and legally he claimed he did. "Care to explain?" I asked. "How you ended up living in my cabin?" Chad shrugged, eyes flicking toward the back of the house, as if bored already. "Mom said you violated some bylaws. Something about improper dock maintenance? Anyway, she transferred it to me." My jaw literally dropped. I'd heard of Karen's petty vendettas, but this was nuclear-level petty.
"Act transferred,"
I repeated, my voice climbing an octave.
"Don't!"
"You mean stole?" Chad just chuckled and took another. "SIP." I didn't trust myself to respond without breaking at least 3 laws, so I stormed off to the HOA office. It was a squat little building at the edge of the community, all beige siding and fake flowers in plastic pots. The blinds were drawn, but I could see the flicker of movement inside. I pounded on the glass until Karen herself appeared, lips pursed. "Tight enough to cut off circulation. Can I help you?" she asked, voice dripping with false sweetness. "You can start by telling me why you gave my cabin to your son," I shot back. Karen tilted her head, pretending to consult the papers. In her hands, it's all in the bylaws. "You've been warned about your dock's state for months." We held a vote. "A vote I was never notified about," I snapped, because it never happened. Her lips twitched, the closest thing to a smile I'd seen from her, I'm afraid. "The decision is final," she said, adjusting her pearl necklace like a judge delivering a sentence. "You're welcome to file a complaint, but the property is already transferred." Her eyes glittered with smug satisfaction. She thought she'd won. I'd seen that look before, usually right before she'd find someone for having a blue mailbox instead of green. But this time, she'd messed with the wrong person. I walked away, heat buzzing in my veins, past the lake that had been my safe place for years. The rippling water caught the sun like shards of glass, and for a second, I just stood there, breathing. Karen thought the fight was over, but she'd only just started it. She'd taken my cabin fine. But she'd forgotten one thing about me. I don't lose without making the other side wish they'd never played. Back at my truck, I yanked my laptop from the passenger seat and balanced it on my knees. If Karen was going to hide behind bylaws, I'd find something bigger to hide behind. I started with the county property database, clicking through maps and deeds like a detective in a TV drama. 10 minutes in, I saw something that made my breath hitch. The HOA didn't own the land under the cabins, not a single square inch. The lots were all leased from a private owner. It's an older man named Franklin Doyle. A quick search told me he lived 2 towns over and was rumored to be looking to sell. If I could buy that land, I wouldn't just get my cabin back, I'd own the dirt under Karen's precious office. I smiled for the first time that day, already hearing the padlock click in my mind. Karen might have stolen my house, but I could steal her ground. I drove straight to Franklin's place, a weathered farmhouse with peeling white paint and a porch swing. He answered the door in suspenders and a ball cap, peering at me like he was trying to place my face. "Mr. Doyle?" I asked, extending a hand. "I'm here about your lakefront property." His eyes lit up the way a fisherman's do when the line finally tugs. "Well, now, that's an interesting topic," he said. Ushering me inside, we sat at his kitchen table, papers spread between us, as I explained the whole Karen debacle. By the time I finished, Franklin was shaking his head in disbelief. "I've been thinking of selling for years," he admitted. "Didn't care much for that HOA myself." We talked numbers, and to my surprise, he wasn't asking for a fortune. By the end of the hour, we had a handshake deal. 2 weeks later, the paperwork was signed, sealed, and recorded at the county courthouse. I was the proud owner of the land under every cabin, the office, and the community dock. The irony was so sweet it almost gave me cavities. Karen's reign was built on sand, and I'd just bought the beach. No, the morning after the sale, I drove to the lake with a new kind of swagger in my step. A shiny brass padlock and a matching chain sat on the passenger seat beside me. The sun was barely up, the mist still curling over the water like lazy smoke. I figured an early start would keep the drama to a minimum. Let's be honest with Karen, there was no such thing. I parked right in front of the HOA office, ignoring the reserved for HOA staff sign. If anyone had a right to that spot now, it was me. The office looked as dull and self-important as ever, with its beige siding and flower pots. I grabbed the padlock, looped the chain through the door handles, and clicked it shut. The sound was better than any revenge fantasy I'd ever had. Half an hour later, Karen's silver Lexus rolled into the lot like it was making a royal entrance. She got out in a cloud of perfume strong enough to knock a crow out of the sky. Eyes went straight to the padlock, and the color drained from her face. "What do you think you're doing?" she screeched, marching toward me in heels that stabbed the gravel. "Just securing my property," I said with a smile. "Your property?" She repeated, like I'd just claimed ownership of the moon. I handed her a copy of the deed, neatly folded, but with the important parts highlighted. Her lips moved silently as she read, and then her eyes shot up to meet mine. "This is impossible," she said, though her voice lacked its usual venom. "It's perfectly legal," I replied. "It's airtight, actually." Chad showed up next, still barefoot, looking like he'd just rolled out of bed. When I told him his cabin now sat on land I owned, he laughed until I showed him the paperwork. The smirk vanished faster than beer at a tailgate party, so. "What does this mean?" he asked, scratching his head like it might help. "It means you're my tenant now," I said sweetly. "Rent's due on the 1st. Karen's face turned the color of overripe tomatoes, and I swear I saw steam coming from her ears. "This is harassment," she barked, jabbing a finger. "At me, actually," I said, pulling out my phone. "It's business." I started recording just to have her tantrum preserved for posterity or YouTube. The camera caught every eye twitch, every stomp of her expensive heels. She threatened to call her lawyer, which I encouraged. I even gave her my attorney's number just to save her the trouble. It only made her angrier, which was, frankly, a bonus. "I will have you removed from this community," she hissed. "Good luck," I said. "I own the dirt under your office." News of the deed spread through the neighborhood like wildfire in dry grass. By lunchtime, half the residents were calling or texting me for the details. Turns out Karen wasn't exactly beloved around here. Several people congratulated me like I'd just won a championship game. One even brought over a pie victory. "Has never tasted so sweet," the local news station picked up the story 2 days later. They sent a young reporter with a microphone and a grin she could barely hide. Karen refused to comment, hiding behind her blinds like a vampire at sunrise. The headline read, HOA President Loses Land to Former Homeowner in Legal Twist. I framed the article and hung it in my cabin. Speaking of my cabin, Chad didn't last long as my tenant. Within a month, he moved out, leaving behind a mess that took me a week to clean. But every hour I spent scrubbing floors felt like reclaiming a piece of my pride. The place smelled like cedar and coffee again, just the way it should. Standing on the porch, I knew the battle was truly over. Karen resigned shortly after, though she claimed it was for personal reasons. Her replacement was a quiet guy named Mark, who believed in less drama, more maintenance. The community seemed lighter without her constant power trips. The HOA meetings stopped feeling like court trials. Amy. I just went back to enjoying my cabin. Still, every time I pass that office and see my padlock on the door, I smile. Not out of spite. Okay, maybe a little, but out of satisfaction. It's a reminder that the fine print works both ways. If someone tries to bury you in paperwork, you can always dig deeper. Sometimes you strike gold. Karen had been a thorn in my side long before the cabin heist. I still remember the first time she'll find me for unsightly lawn decor. It was a weathered wooden pelican my late grandfather carved by hand. She claimed it violated the aesthetic cohesion of the neighborhood. I claimed she had too much time on her hands. Then there was the dock incident 2 summers ago. A single board had warped after a storm, which I planned to fix that weekend. Karen photographed it, printed the photo, and taped it to the HOA bulletin. Board underneath, she wrote example of negligence in red marker. Subtlety was not her strong suit. These petty battles might seem small, but they piled up like storm debris. Each one chipped away at any chance of civility between us. Neighbors learned quickly, either you were in Karen's circle or you were her target. I was never interested in her little empire of fear. Apparently that made me public enemy number 1. Buying the land was more than revenge. It was insurance. No matter what the HOA tried next, they couldn't touch me without my permission. It felt like holding the deed to their entire kingdom. Franklin even threw in the old dock rights. Just to sweeten the deal, Karen probably choked when she found that out. Franklin and I had bonded over our mutual dislike for power-hungry types. He'd been renting the land for decades, but never liked the HOA's tone. They forget whose dirt they're standing on, he'd said, pouring me coffee. Was the kind of man who valued a handshake more than a contract. Lucky for me, we had both. The night before I locked the office, I barely slept. Not out of nerves, out of anticipation. I lay in bed, picturing Karen's face when she realized the tables had turned. I considered bringing popcorn, but decided the padlock was dramatic enough. Sometimes simplicity is the best form of theater. After the news story broke, things got interesting. The county sent auditors to review the HOA's financials. Rumors flew about missing funds and questionable maintenance expenses. Karen went from smug ruler to skittish shadow in just a week. I savored every moment of her unraveling. Chad tried to play the victim in all this. Told anyone who'd listened that I'd tricked his mom. But people weren't buying it, especially when they remembered his free boat. The man had freeloaded off this lake for years. Now he was freeloading off someone else's couch. One evening, I walked past the office just as Karen pulled up. She sat in her car for a long moment, staring at the padlock. Her hands gripped the wheel so tight her knuckles went white. I wondered if she was counting the days until she could retire somewhere else. Hopefully somewhere far away from me. Neighbors started using my situation as inspiration. One couple fought a bogus fence violation, and another refused to pay an absurd fine for a flower bed too close to the sidewalk. Karen's grip on the community slipped faster than she could tighten it. It was glorious to watch. By the time she resigned, the place felt different. People waved more, chatted more, even planned a block barbecue. It's amazing how much lighter a place feels without constant nitpicking. Mark, the new president, joked that the HOA should stand for helping our area. I told him as long as it didn't stand for harassing our area, we'd be fine. I still keep all the paperwork from the land deal in a bright red folder. It's labeled Karen's downfall in big, bold letters. Not that I plan to need. it again, but it makes me smile. Every so often, I flip through it like a photo album. It's my own personal victory scrapbook. Sometimes I catch myself wondering what Karen tells people now.
Oh.
Maybe she claims she left to spend more time with family. Maybe she blames the bylaws for being misinterpreted. Or maybe, deep down, she knows exactly what happened, but she underestimated me, and I don't forgive that easily. The cabin feels even sweeter now than when I first bought it. Every creak in the floorboards reminds me I fought for this place. The lake is my mirror, reflecting the peace I reclaimed. On calm mornings, I sit on the porch swing with coffee in hand. The water doesn't just sparkle, it winks at me. Owning the land gave me more than just security. It gave me leverage I never knew I wanted. The HOA now sends me polite notices, almost apologetic in tone. Sometimes they even ask for permission. Before doing maintenance, I always take my time answering just for fun. The best part? I've become the unofficial go-to for neighbor disputes. People knock on my door when they feel wronged by the HOA. I listen, nod, and point them to the exact clauses they can use in their defense. Knowledge is power, and I've got a surplus. Karen taught me that much, at least. For a few glorious weeks, the lake was calm. The water shimmered, the neighbors smiled, and Karen was gone, so I thought. Like a bad horror movie villain, she wasn't finished yet. I should have known peace was just the intermission. It started with a letter, cream-colored envelope. My name written in bold ink. Inside was a single sheet of paper stamped Notice of Intent to Sue. Apparently, Karen had found a lawyer. Willing to humor her, she claimed I had illegally restricted access to HOA property. I nearly spit my coffee laughing. I called my attorney, who practically cackled when I read it to him. This is bluffing at its finest, he said. Case would crumble before we even stepped in a courtroom. Still, I kept the letter. Trophies come in many forms. And this one was going in my Karen's downfall folder. A week later, the office padlock mysteriously disappeared. In its place was a flimsy new lock, clearly bought in a rush. I checked the security footage from a neighbor's porch camera. Guess whose Lexus was parked right out front at 2 a.m.? Karen had gotten bold or desperate. I replaced her cheap lock with a chain that looked like it belonged on a bank vault. This time, I posted a laminated sign, private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted. The word prosecuted seemed to give her hives. She stopped coming by herself and started sending Chad instead. Elle wasn't any better at subtlety. 1. Afternoon, Chad showed up with a clipboard and an attitude. Mom says you're illegally profiting from the HOA, he said. I looked around, gesturing to the empty lot beneath my feet. Really? Show me the profits, then we'll talk. He left 5 minutes later, still muttering about bylaws. That was the thing about Karen and her crew. They relied on intimidation. The moment you called their bluff, they scrambled. But she wasn't ready to quit, not yet. 2 days later, I got another letter, this one from the county zoning board. It accused me of violating setback requirements for recent construction. I hadn't built a thing since buying the land, so I called the zoning office, ready to clear it up. Turns out, someone had anonymously reported me twice. When I asked if the anonymous complainant drove a silver Lexus, the clerk laughed. Apparently, Karen had called in person and been overheard. The false report backfired spectacularly. The zoning officer scheduled an inspection of the entire HOA by the end of the week. They'd found multiple violations on common property. Guess whose name was still on the maintenance contracts? Karen's resignation hadn't scrubbed her signature from the records. I didn't have to lift a finger for the next part. The county slapped the HOA with thousands in fines. Mark, the new president, called me for advice. I told him, start with honesty and maybe retire the word violation for a year. He agreed, and we actually managed to laugh about it, Karen. However, was furious. She cornered me at the grocery store, hissing between the frozen peas and pizza. You think you've won, but this isn't over, she spat. Her cart was filled entirely with wine bottles, which told me plenty. I just raised an eyebrow and moved on. Her next move was pure desperation. She started a Facebook group called Save Our Lake Community. It was basically a smear campaign against me disguised as civic pride. Screenshots started pouring in from neighbors. My favorite post was, "She's holding the HOA hostage," with a pirate emoji. I didn't respond online. Feeding trolls is a waste of time. But I did have a quiet word with Franklin. Turns out he'd been invited to join the group and was unimpressed. He left a single comment: "She's the reason I sold the land." Mike, dropped by midsummer, the drama was losing steam. Karens. Group dwindled to a handful of loyal complainers. The rest of the community was too busy enjoying the lake without constant nitpicking. The barbecue Mark organized was a huge success. Even Chad showed up, though he avoided me like I carried the plague. That night, sitting on my porch, I finally felt the weight lift. Karen's shadow no longer loomed over the shoreline. The cabin was mine again. The land was secure, and the community was lighter. It wasn't just a win, it was balance restored. I knew she'd never truly forgive me, and that was fine. Sometimes justice doesn't come in courtrooms. It comes in the quiet absence of someone's chaos. It's the sound of laughter, replacing arguments at meetings. It's neighbors planting flowers without fear of fines. And it's a padlock on a beige office door, catching the afternoon sun. I still keep that padlock polished, by the way. Not because it needs it, but because it deserves it. It's more than metal and a key. It's a symbol. A reminder that standing your ground is worth the trouble, especially when the ground is literally yours. People love to paint me as the villain, but I was just doing my job. HOA president is the backbone of any respectable community. Without me, there would have been chaos, mismatched curtains, unapproved flower beds. Someone had to enforce the bylaws. Apparently, that makes me controlling. That cabin was practically falling apart under its previous owner. The dock was a hazard, the mailbox didn't meet color standards, and don't get me started on the porch light. So, yes, I transferred it to my son. Why not? He's family, and he appreciates my hard work, and frankly, he deserved it more. Then, she had to go and buy the land. Who even thinks of something like that? It was petty, vindictive, and frankly, genius, I'll admit. The padlock was a nice touch, unnecessary, but stylish. Not that I'm complimenting her, of course. The court thing was just to make a point. I knew I wouldn't win. I'm not stupid. But sometimes you need to make a little noise. Unfortunately, the judge didn't appreciate my presentation. Probably because he's not used to real leadership. People say I lost, but I disagree. I simply reprioritized. Less meetings, more wine.
Fine.
Less bylaws, more brunch. Frankly, I'm thriving. And if she thinks I'm gone forever, she's wrong. I'm patient, and I know the bylaws better than anyone. One day she'll slip up, and I'll be ready. Because in this community, power changes hands like the seasons, and Karen always comes back. After Karen's retreat, the lake entered a golden age. Meetings were shorter, complaints were fewer, and the sunsets seemed brighter. People were planting flowers without fear of aesthetic violations. The sound of laughter replaced the sound of gavel bangs. It was bliss, and bliss makes you drop your guard. One spring afternoon, I found a typed notice slipped under my door. It was from the Lakefront Alliance, which sounded like a discount superhero team. They were concerned citizens advocating for restoring traditional order. I didn't need a signature to guess who had started it. Karen had found a new alias. The Alliance claimed they wanted balance between property owners and NSEs. The HOA, but the language was loaded with the same Karenisms I knew too well. Words like compliance, harmony, and mandatory. It was basically a softer way of saying, we want control back. Cute, they thought I'd fall. For it at the next HOA meeting, the Alliance made their debut. 3 people walked in wearing matching navy polo shirts. Their leader was a tall man with slick back hair and a smirk that rivaled Karen's. He introduced himself as Gregory Marsh, community advocate. Translation: new villain in a slightly different costume. Gregory made a speech about modernizing the neighborhood rules. His eyes kept flicking to me like I was the final boss level. The crowd was polite but skeptical. They'd seen this game before. Mark handled it diplomatically, nodding without committing. I just sat back and let Gregory talk himself into a corner. When the meeting ended, Gregory made a beeline for me. The infamous landowner, he said like it was a title in a fantasy novel. He offered a handshake, which I took just to gauge his grip. Firm, but not Karen firm. We exchanged pleasantries, but I knew this was round one. The next week, Alliance flyers started appearing in mailboxes. They promised reasonable regulation and equal footing for all residents. It was dressed up in pretty language, but the subtext was obvious. They wanted to erode my leverage without saying it outright. I circled every red flag in pen and kept the flyer. My neighbors weren't buying it, at least not most of them. A few fence-sitters seemed intrigued by Gregory's fresh ideas. That was the danger. Charm can be more effective than force. Karen had been all hammer, no honey. Gregory was pouring the honey thick. I decided not to confront him directly yet. Instead, I reached out to Franklin, who still knew everyone worth knowing. He told me Gregory had a history with other HOAs in nearby towns. Always came in talking about unity, always left with a power grab. It was his signature move. Armed with that intel, I started my own quiet campaign. I hosted casual get-togethers at the cabin. Food, drinks, laughter, no politics, no speeches, just community. The more we connected as neighbors, the less anyone needed saving. It was slow, subtle, and effective. Gregory tried to bait me at the following meeting. He brought up excessive land control and monopolization of resources. Mark reminded him the land sale was legal and binding. Gregory's smile didn't falter, but his eyes flashed annoyance. I recognized that look. He'd expected me to lose my cool. Instead, I asked one pointed question. Gregory, do you own property here? The room went quiet enough to hear the clock tick. He cleared his throat and admitted he didn't yet. That landed like a rock in a pond, rippling through the crowd. A man without skin in the game was trying to change the rules. Over the next month, the Alliance fizzled. Their Facebook page went dormant. Their flyers stopped showing up. Turns out, Gregory wasn't interested in a fight he couldn't win fast. And without Karen to feed the fire, the embers died on their own. It was almost disappointing. I'd been ready for round two. Karen herself never resurfaced publicly. I'd see her Lexus at the gas station occasionally, but she never approached. Maybe she'd finally realized this wasn't her kingdom anymore. Or maybe she was just regrouping, waiting for the right storm. Either way, I stayed ready. The rest of that year was quiet, in the best way. The community actually voted to reduce HOA fees. Projects got done without drama, and even the docks got a facelift. People smiled at meetings instead of glaring. Felt like the lake was breathing easier. Sometimes I catch myself missing the chaos just a little.
Ouch.
Victory is sweet, but it's also quiet. There's no better reminder of a fight than the sound of heels on gravel. But peace is addictive too, and I'd earned every second of it. Still, the padlock stays polished. The red folder stays on the shelf. Ow. And I keep Franklin on speed dial. Because if there's one thing I've learned here, it's this. Empires don't just fall, they try to rise again. The trouble with peace is that it makes people invent problems. By midsummer, a few restless neighbors started grumbling again. Not about me, about the new trash collection schedule. Apparently Tuesday mornings were inconvenient for some folks. It was the smallest crack, but Gregory saw it. Suddenly, the Alliance Facebook page was alive again. Gregory posted a poll about alternative pickup days. It looked harmless, but I recognized the bait. Get people talking, stir some dissatisfaction, then slide in bigger ideas. Karen had played this game with potholes once. Classic wedge issue. I decided to play along, just to see where he'd take it. I voted in the poll, but not for the most popular option. Instead, I wrote a comment suggesting a rotating schedule. Gregory liked my comment publicly, which meant he was baiting me too. This was chess, and I was still holding my queen. 2 weeks later, Gregory announced a community feedback night. It wasn't an official HOA meeting, more like a rally. Held at the community center, free snacks, open mic. I knew better than to skip it. Absence is as loud as presence. So I showed up in my sharpest blazer. The crowd was bigger than I expected, about 40 people. Gregory worked the room like a politician. shaking hands and laughing. When it was his turn to speak, he started with small wins. New benches by the walking trail, better lighting near the docks. Then he shifted to bigger concerns about private land control. That was my cue to sip my coffee slowly. He didn't name me, but the message was clear. Private land should serve the community, not personal gain. That was rich. Coming from a man without an address here, but I didn't take the bait, not yet. Instead, I asked the room a question. How many of you were here last year? Almost every hand went up. And how many remember who bought the land when it was about to be sold out from under you? Silence, then a few murmurs, then a slow ripple of nods. Gregory's smile tightened, but he pivoted smoothly. Of course, we're grateful for the current owner's intervention, he said. Oh, but we must also think long-term. Translation: he couldn't win that round, so he'd aim for the next. I made a note to call Franklin that night. After the meeting, Franklin came over for whiskey on the porch. He'd been watching Gregory's moves too. "Man's smart," Franklin said. "He's not going to crash in. He's going to seep in." Nodded. That's what made him dangerous. Karen's hurricane was easier to fight than Gregory's slow rain. That week I started my counteroffensive, not a direct attack. Something friendlier. I organized a lake appreciation day, with fishing contests, boat rides, and a big barbecue. All free, all paid for by me, no strings attached. You don't fight honey with vinegar, you fight honey with better honey. The event was a hit. Kids ran around with cotton candy, neighbors mingled without agendas. Even Mark came out and grilled. Burgers in a Lake Life apron. Gregory showed up, but he didn't have much to do except eat a hot dog. Sometimes the best move is to make the other guy irrelevant. Still, I knew he wouldn't stop completely. Sure enough, in the fall, he pushed a petition for community oversight of land use. It didn't name me, but everyone knew what it meant. Problem for him was, it required a majority vote from property owners. And I'd spent the last year becoming everyone's favorite neighbor. When the vote came, it wasn't even close. 28 against, 5-4, 2 abstained. Gregory kept his composure, but I saw the defeat in his eyes. It wasn't the crushing meltdown Karen had. It was quieter. It's quieter. But final after that, the Alliance page went silent for good. Gregory stopped coming to meetings, and rumors said he moved on. Some said he took a job in another HOA 3. Town's over. Others swore they saw him at the farmer's market selling artisan honey. Either way, the board was mine again. Winter came, and with it, a calm I hadn't felt in years. Snow covered the docks. The cabins glowed with holiday lights. Neighbors brought cookies to my porch and stayed for cocoa. Even the lake seemed to hum with contentment. It felt like the end of a very long battle. And yet, I kept the padlock polished, kept the red folder updated. Because people like Gregory and Karen never really disappear. They just wait until you're distracted. But I don't get distracted anymore. By late January, I thought Gregory was gone for good. The Alliance page hadn't been updated in months. His navy polos were probably gathering dust somewhere. But then a letter arrived in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a property inquiry from an out-of-town investor. It was polite, almost bland in its wording. They were interested in purchasing select lakefront assets. Assets was the key word that made my stomach clench. I didn't need to guess who had tipped them off. Gregory had found a proxy. I called Franklin immediately and read him the letter. He whistled low, the sound of a man recognizing trouble. "This smells like a shell game," he said. "Someone with deep pockets hides behind a clean name, buys influence." I could almost hear him smirking. "Shame for them you're not." "For sale." Still, I didn't want to play defense. I called my lawyer and asked for a full title review. Every inch of my land, every right attached to it. If they were planning to wedge in through a loophole, I'd seal it. 2 days later, I had a 60-page binder on my desk. In the meantime, I played the part of the oblivious local. I attended HOA meetings, joked about the weather, and brought cookies. Not a hint of concern crossed my face. If Gregory was still watching, I wanted him relaxed. Overconfidence makes people sloppy. Sure enough, the investor made their move in early March, They bought 2 small parcels near the walking trail from absentee owners. Nothing illegal, nothing flashy, just positioning. Then they filed a proposal for community easements across my land. This was dressed up as improving public access. The board reviewed it, and even Mark looked uneasy. Easements are tricky. They can start small and grow teeth. Once you allow them, you can lose control fast. I asked for the proposal in writing, every clause highlighted. And then I saw the smoking gun. Buried in the language was a clause about shared administrative use. It basically gave them partial control of the land office site, which of course was where the HOA headquarters sat. It was Karen's dream, dressed in legal jargon. Gregory's fingerprints were all over it. I didn't confront them in the meeting. Instead, I thanked them for the proposal and asked for a week to review. That week, I called every property owner I'd befriended, explained in plain English what the clause meant. By Friday, I had an army. When the board reconvened, the room was packed. Neighbors stood shoulder to shoulder, some holding signs. Keep our lake hours wasn't subtle, but it didn't need to be. When the investors' rep stood to speak, they were met with silence. Mark cleared his throat and called for a vote. Was unanimous proposal denied. The rep looked like they'd bitten into a lemon. I didn't even bother looking at Gregory, though I knew he was there. Sometimes the sweetest win is the one you don't gloat over. But oh, did I want to? After the meeting, Franklin caught up to me in the parking lot. You realize they're done now, he said. I raised an eyebrow. Franklin doesn't declare a win lightly. They threw their best punch and missed. That's it. And for once I believed him. Spring returned, and with it, a peace I could trust. No flyers, no petitions, no whispered campaigns. The lake glittered under the sun. The air smelled like cedar. Boats drifted lazily, unbothered by politics. It was the kind of quiet worth protecting. I still keep the padlock polished. The red folder is thicker than ever. And Franklin still gets invited over for whiskey, 'cause I know how this works. Power attracts challengers. But I also know this: they'll never take my crown again.